Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Our Mayors podcast series for the African American Mayors Association. I am your host, Alaina Beverly, and today we are going to tackle the complex and critical issue of criminal justice reform. The United States imprisons its citizens more than any other country, with mass incarceration disproportionately impacting the poor and people of color. We are home to 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its incarcerated population. According to the Urban Institute and the Equal Justice Initiative, 2.2 million people are currently incarcerated, with $80 billion spent annually on the prison industrial complex. And in cities all across the country, disparities abound along the lines of race at every stage of the justice system, from traffic stops to the use of police force, from arrests to detention to sentencing and incarceration. So the call for criminal justice reform is not new, but there is a renewed sense of urgency in response to the harm that the legal and law enforcement institutions in our country are exacting on the most vulnerable communities. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Sandra Bland and countless others, and in the wake of nationwide protests in 2020, many of America's leading corporations made unprecedented commitments toward racial justice and structural reform. However, Verizon's commitment to human and civil rights has been longstanding. And that's why we're so happy to have with us today and have with us as a sponsor of this program, Verizon. Verizon has supported criminal legal system reforms at both the federal and state levels for years. And with over 135,000 employees and over 120 million customers across the United States, Verizon serves more than a third of the population of this country. And so they also see their work to reform the criminal justice system as being an effort to make all of our communities stronger and our economy healthier. Today, to speak about current trends in criminal justice reform, I'm so delighted to have with us the president of the African American Mayors Association, Mayor Sylvester Turner, who's the mayor of the city of Houston, Texas. He's known for initiating sweeping justice reforms in his city and doing it with ease. And we're also joined by corporate titan Donna Epps. She is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Strategic Alliances at Verizon. So let's get right into it. How are you both feeling today? Mayor Turner, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Alaina. It's good to be with you again. You're becoming the person for these podcasts. So good to be with you. And it's good to be with Donna Epps again. We've been together before. And I just want to start off on behalf of AAMA of thanking you both. Thank you, Alaina, for your time. And then Donna, let me thank you personally, and let me thank Verizon for being a tremendous partner with the African American Mayors Association.
Well, thank you
Donna,
so much.
It's so great to see you, Donna. So how are you feeling? How are you doing? It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Alaina and Mayor Turner. It's a pleasure to be with you. And let me just say how honored we are to, one, be a part of this conversation, but what a privilege it's been to partner with AAMA over the years. We've had a long-standing partnership, and we really appreciate all the work you do. And our point of view is that it takes collaboration and all of us doing our part in our respective lanes to move society forward. And you guys have just been a tremendous partner in doing that. So thank you so much for all the work that you do.
All right. So let's dig right in and talk about the why. Why is Verizon so deeply engaged on these issues of criminal justice and the call for reform?
Sure. I know for a lot of folks, you might say, wow, this really seems like an odd topic for a large company like Verizon to engage in. But let me tell you a little bit about our thinking. We believe that there are certain policy issues that are so big, that have such a major impact on society, that it's important for us to use our platform, our influence, and our voice to engage on them. And criminal justice reform is one of those issues that affects our communities, the communities we serve, our employees, and our stakeholders, our partners. And so because this issue is so important to those three stakeholders that are so important to us, we believe the issue should be important to us. And we recognize that, unfortunately, the inequities in our criminal legal system have had a devastating impact on many communities and many families that we serve, families that work with us and for us. And so we think it's important for every sector of society, including business leaders, to make their voices heard and to be part of the solution. And so we are by no means on the front lines, but through great partners like AAMA and others, we have tried to become more knowledgeable about the issues and the problems, and really have taken their lead in figuring out where our voice can be most impactful.
Well, speaking of impact, Mayor Turner, in light of the movement for Black justice and liberation, you've seen real sweeping criminal justice reform. You've initiated sweeping criminal justice reform in the city of Houston. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I would tell you, and again, thank you all for participating on such an important topic. When it comes to criminal justice, it has been a movement. And it has been a movement that has been taking place over an extended period of time. It just happened to have come to a head after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, where again, people simply said enough. People just didn't want to put up with things like anymore. And for the city of Houston, George Floyd's family grew up, lived in the city of Houston, lived on the south side of the city. Their family lived in Cutie homes right across the street from Texas Southern University. George Floyd, for example, went to school at Yates High School across the street from Texas Southern. With the death of George Floyd, and quite frankly, the hundreds of thousands, if not million people that protested, the message reverberated throughout this country and beyond. And I'll never forget on the day of his funeral, at the funeral, I indicated to the people there that the city of Houston would move forward in implementing reforms, criminal justice reforms, reforming how our police force conducts its business. And the very next day, signed an executive order, pretty much requiring de-escalation, requiring police officers to report when they see someone committing an offense, violating law, violating policy, that they had a duty to intervene, not just firing and moving vehicles, giving warnings where possible before the use of deadly force, reporting. They have to report the use of deadly force. So it was a number of things that were included in that executive order that I signed the very next day. And then after that, put together a 45-person, the mayor's task force on police reform, no elected officials, community activists and other community leaders came together and gave them a short window. So the movement had already started. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's not like it's just happened, but people simply had just gotten sick and tired of seeing their loved ones and people killed at the hand of law enforcement, and they wanted things to change. And I'm just appreciative to the people in this city who came together and said, let's not wait, let's make it happen, and let's do it now.
Well, I think that we can all appreciate that while this movement has been growing over time and the people said, let's not wait, you also moved swiftly with executive action. And that is unprecedented. And it is something that we all respect. And Verizon, Donna, has been working on this issue for quite a long time. And so can you speak to how, now we did the why, but now how are you engaging on criminal justice reform?
Sure. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time is on the criminal justice system itself. And, what we learned, as many know, is that it's not one cohesive system. It's actually an amalgamation of a lot of different systems, and none of them are coordinated with one another very well. So what we decided to do was take a three-pronged approach. In the first instance, we focused on advocacy, both advocating at the state and the federal level, starting off with supporting the First Step Act. We sent our lobbyists up to Capitol Hill and met with members of Congress, indicating our support and why this was so important for the business community to make sure that we had an equitable legal system, criminal legal system. But from there, we've supported a number of bills at the federal and state level, whether it's the Clean Slate Act, a bill that would allow folks who are incarcerated to be eligible for Pell Grants, ban the box, a host of different laws. But we focused on several distinct areas. One, right to counsel. Two, expungement or the sealing of records, because although there have been a lot of reforms that allow more people to be eligible to have their records expunged so that they don't have the stigma following them for the rest of their lives and serving as a barrier to employment or other opportunities, many of the people who are eligible are not actually able to take advantage of those laws because they're very Byzantine and it's very complex. You almost need to hire a lawyer to avail yourself of your rights. So that's one area. Bail reform as well as parole reform. And then something near and dear to our hearts is really trying to get the prison payphone fees down. We've weighed in both at the FCC as well as at the state level. And I'm pleased to say there's actually a hearing next month on a federal bill that would ban exorbitant fees that are often attached to payphones in prisons. So that whole advocacy piece is one piece. The next piece we did was our pro bono work. We always had a pro bono program, but we added a component to it for criminal legal work, and we focused on juvenile justice. We partner with an organization called the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, whose mission is to ban harsh sentences for children, life sentences, or something that may as well be life, 60, 80-year sentences. And so we have had a tremendous partnership with them. And we actually have 3 cases currently that our pro bono teams are working on to make sure that the reforms that have taken place, and I'm pleased to say there have been a number of states who have put in place laws that prohibit extreme sentencing of youth. So representing individuals to allow them to have a second chance and to be able to get out and resume their lives, because we know that, children are very different from adults, and that the mistakes that you make in your youth should not haunt you for the rest of your life. And then
brains aren't even fully formed at the time that most juveniles are sentenced, right? So the idea of them being able to fully appreciate consequences of their actions, it just does not work. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're right. And that's
continue.
what the science supports that, which is why the Supreme Court has banned the execution of children and extreme sentencing, but we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we see more people avail themselves of those laws, and frankly, to get more laws in place. So the pro bono piece is the second piece. And the third piece, we focused on using our platform to elevate the voices of folks who are impacted by the system. And so we started a series of events, and that work is ongoing, in which we had a number of public events partnering oftentimes with civil and human rights stakeholders that we work with all the time to have programs focused on different aspects of the criminal legal system. Most recently, we had a program focusing on the unique plight of women who are incarcerated, because our prisons are not tailored to provide for many of the unique needs that women have. So we've done events on that. We've done events focused on children who are incarcerated. We've done events on innovations in rehabilitation, where we've had judges and different organizations who are working to create different pathways beyond just incarceration to help rehabilitate. And so, in fact, we have one coming up next month on fair chance talent, second chance talent, what the business community can do to create opportunities for folks to reduce the recidivism rate. And so that work has really been rewarding because we've been able to meet firsthand with folks who otherwise wouldn't have a voice and introduce them to a new community, the corporate community, to educate our peers at other corporations about this issue and to have them hear the tremendous talent of folks who have been impacted by the system and to learn more about how they can get involved and be part of the solution.
That's incredible. That's very comprehensive work at every phase within the continuum. And at some point, I want us to come back and put a pin in the corporation world and how corporate America is showing up here and the work that you've done with the Business Roundtable, for example. Yes. But let's talk about this one phase of the justice or injustice process that involves police. So Mayor Turner, I know that in April, you announced sweeping new Houston police reforms. Some of them seem just commonsensical, right? Like the use of body cameras, yes. And having an independent police oversight board. And following the wake of the murder of Sandra Bland, making sure that we don't use, that there's a complete ban on no-knock warrants.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about how the community responded to those types of innovations or solutions. And has that improved policing in the more vulnerable communities of Houston?
The responses have been overwhelming. The task force came back in a 90-day period, and they recommended 104 changes. All captured in this book. And I am pleased to say that we have probably instituted more than 60% of those changes already. And it's about an ecosystem. I heard Donna say that there are many different components, but they often don't interrelate very well. Well, it is about establishing this criminal justice ecosystem. One of the recommendations, for example, deals with, a lot of people get traffic stops. They would have warrants. They may not have the financial means. And so, for example, if they end up getting stopped, arrested, they can lose their driver's license. And there are about 100,000 of those type cases, for example, in the Houston municipal court system. One of the recommendations is basically to say to waive a lot of those outstanding warrants. And so we created what we call the safe harbor courts, where the judges don't stay at the municipal courthouse, but the judges actually go out into the community and people can come directly to them. It may be at a multi-service center, okay? They take a look at their cases and they just, waive those outstanding warrants. So people can continue to move about in their lives, and then they're not needlessly stopped for these outstanding traffic violations. Citing release is another initiative. For example, you get stopped, let's say for some sort of traffic signal of some kind, you're not arrested, you're just given a citation and you're going about your business. That helps out quite a bit. And all of these things have to be reported. And we've created dashboards where people can literally go online and see all of this. With respect to crisis intervention, a lot of times police are interacting with folk who are at their moment of crisis. It could be a homeless person. It could be a situation where you're dealing with domestic violence. It could be some people can have mental behavioral health challenges. Police are called out, but they're not the best ones to be responding to that. So there are a number of crisis intervention strategies that we've put in place to make sure that the right persons with the right resources go to them instead of just a classified police officer. Training is critical, but even before you get to training, how you recruit and hire, because really the reforms start from the recruiting phase, and then once you hire them, the training, that's important, and the interaction with the community, because many of our police officers, let's say, stay outside of these communities, many of these diverse communities, let me put it that way. So they're interacting with folk that, there may not be that much of a history. So it's important to establish that relationship so that the police officers can know the communities that they police, and vice versa. We're all on the same, we should be on the same team and not at odds with one another. So you mentioned the independent police oversight. We now have a deputy inspector, which is separate and apart from the police department. And so with these different dashboards, people can file a complaint, not just with HPD. They can file a complaint with the NAACP, the Urban League, the LGBTQ community, or they can do it online. It can be anonymous. There are 5 different languages by which people can file the complaint. So we try to make it as easy as possible. And then the Deputy Inspector General, her responsibility is to investigate and then report to the Independent Police Oversight Board. So it is an ecosystem. There are a lot more. I can talk about it all day, but the responses have been overwhelming. Have we seen sign of improvement? I think we will note that over a period of time. Reforms don't necessarily bring about change in 24 hours, okay? But it does introduce accountability in the system. And then you have to monitor and have a set of matrix. And then you evaluate day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. So I'm pleased with where we are, but I'm not saying mission accomplished. I'm simply saying that we've made tremendous headway. And now it's about execution, implementation, and holding everyone accountable from the top to the bottom, including the mayor, all the way down to the person that's on patrol.
Well, so I hear a number of themes bubbling up from your work and from the innovation, Mayor Turner. I heard community engagement, data collection, transparency, and accountability, and policing standards. And my understanding, Donna, is that the Business Roundtable, the Racial Equity and Justice System Committee of the Business Roundtable, is focused on similar areas. I'm wondering if you can speak to us about Verizon's decision to be part of the Business Roundtable and be part of that racial equity initiative, and what that collaboration looks like.
Yeah, of course. First, let me just commend Mayor Turner for all of the innovative approaches. That was such a comprehensive approach. You've got every base covered there, and it's such a great model for others to follow. So that's just tremendous work. So let me talk a little bit about the Business Roundtable. First, we have been longstanding members, and I think it is important to note that we recognize that law enforcement is important. They have difficult jobs, but they are incredibly important in keeping us all safe and having a functioning, stable democracy. We certainly need them and support them. That said, clearly, there's a recognition that there's some reform that needs to take place. So this started in terms of the Business Roundtable's engagement on criminal justice reform. After the murder of George Floyd, a racial equity committee was put together, and that committee had a number of subcommittees. There was a subcommittee involving healthcare and financial services and education and a number of different committees. One was criminal justice reform, and our CEO was a member of that. And one of the reasons we wanted to be a part of it was given our own work on the issue. And we'd spent most of our time, really all of our time, not on the system, what happens to a person once they enter the system. We had not spent much time on the getting into the system, i.e. the law enforcement part of it,
Right.
but all of the multitude of issues that are resident in the system, and there are many. But of course, in that moment, what this committee focused on was police reform. So the Business Roundtable came up with its recommendations for what they believe should be in any reform bill. And again, I think it's fair to say that the CEOs approached this topic with a lot of humility, recognizing that as business leaders, they did not have the expertise to be in the weeds on the issue. But there were certain topics that were pretty clear, and a lot of them overlap with what the mayor outlined. Data collection, transparency, and I'm proud to say accountability was a part of the recommendations as well. And of course, training and oversight. So the recommendations were quite robust coming out of the business community. And in addition to those recommendations, the BRT, along with each of the member companies' lobbyists, engaged and really urged Congress to come up with a bipartisan solution. Our CEO actually sent a separate letter to Congress supporting police reform. And I think it is a tremendous move and shift in the dialogue that you see from corporate America to have the largest companies in the country acknowledge that reform is needed and then to publicly advocate for such reform and specify that accountability needs to be part of that, in addition to all of the other aspects of addressing the failings that became evident. So I think that, it is a sign of the times that leaders in all walks of life, including in the business community, use their influence and their political capital to say, yes, reform is needed. And we are in full support. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, last week, the negotiations on Capitol Hill reached an impasse. And the BRT put out a statement expressing disappointment and encouraging members of Congress to come back to the table. So we will continue to work on this issue. But, they are, I think it's fair to say that while at the federal level, things may have stalled, the work is moving forward at the state and local level, hearing the work that Mayor Turner and others have done at that level. And so, we just have to continue working on all aspects of our criminal legal system, whether it's the front end with law enforcement or where we've spent the bulk of our time on the sort of the end. Once you're in the system, what happens and what happens when you leave.
And if I can just chime in on that, I was with one of the sisters of George Floyd just on Sunday, who was voicing extreme disappointment that the negotiations have broken down and the George Floyd Policing Act is not in law at this point. And let me join with Donna and BRT and others of saying this is something that must happen, because if we didn't learn anything from last year, what people need to get is that people are not going away and people are really tired of being mistreated, of these reforms not taking place. And so it's in everybody's best interest for the George Floyd Policing Reform Acts to be passed and put in law. And I certainly would encourage Congress and especially the Senate to really work this out.
Donna, I really applaud everything that Verizon has done and that BRT has done on this front, because this is a whole new way of expressing corporate social responsibility. It's almost, I've heard the term corporate justice. And we know that accountability is so important. So the fact that you included that in both the call for reform at the federal level and also expressed the disappointment that they weren't able to reach a bipartisan solution, it's real corporate leadership. And Mayor Turner, you have also focused on accountability in the Office of Policing Reform and Accountability. Can you describe that a little bit more for us and share what it might offer as a model for other cities?
Well, any system that is put in place without accountability is no system at all that's worth anything. Accountability has to be at the table and a part of the equation. It has to be front and center. So that's critically important. If you don't have accountability, you can have the best plan on the books, But if there's no accountability, you will find people deviating from the plan. Okay. So accountability is very central, and transparency then becomes critical as a part of that accountability. That's why we put together these different dashboards that are interactive, that people can see the information in real time, that they can know about these sighting reliefs and who we are stopping, police officers are stopping. What are the charges? What are the outcomes? It's important, like this body-worn cameras. You can have that, but if you don't release it, what does it mean? And so we say it in 30 days or less. And in most cases, it's just a matter of maybe a week or two, and we release them. No matter how it may look, it's better for you to put the information out than to be holding on the information, and then people then become very suspicious. There's a lot of distrust, and that's a large part of it. And so if you want law enforcement and the community and law enforcement to be working together, then you have to establish a trust relationship. And a part of that is being transparent, having a very accountable system, and then making sure that there's interaction between your community activists and law enforcement, elected officials, but everyone has to be invited to the table. And another piece I do want to thank Verizon. I want to give Verizon I'm listening to Donna, to what you're saying and the role that Verizon has been playing. And look, I salute Verizon because they are leading the way in this space, and other businesses and corporations are following. But in addition to what Verizon is doing, it's not just on police reform, because if you just start with police reform and you don't talk about the investments in these communities that have been underserved and under-resourced, you're still missing. So I want to thank Verizon, and I can speak from Houston example, partnering with the city of Houston and just making community investments, getting into these communities that have been underserved, because that's the other piece. You just can't invest your money in law enforcement or just in police. You have to invest even more into addressing these inequities that exist within these communities that have been underserved and under-resourced for decades. You got to do them both. And quite frankly, you got to make those community investments even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mayor Turner. And I could not agree with you more on the notion that part of public safety has to be investing in communities to make sure that there is an environment there that provides the appropriate support systems and resources so that citizens have opportunities that keep them from even being in a situation in which they might encounter our criminal legal system. And so I think that is really a different way that we all need to think about how do we improve public safety. It has to be an all of the above approach in terms of supporting these communities, investing in these communities, and creating an environment in which all citizens can thrive. And that if we don't do that, then we're really just trying to put a Band-Aid on the symptom instead of going to the root causes of the problem.
Absolutely.
Absolutely right. Now, speaking to the idea of not just investing in the justice system and also not just investing in community development and supports, but investing in alternatives to moments when there is a crisis, right? Other forms of crisis intervention. Mayor Turner, I know that you've invested $25 million over the last 3 years, over the next 3 years in crisis intervention approaches. Can you describe that for us? And how do you think that will actually serve communities better and also at the end of the day, perhaps cost less?
Yep. And quite frankly, we're probably investing more than that, over the next 3 years. Look, we ask police officers to do everything, okay? And that model doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So for people who find themselves in mental behavioral crisis, we want to send our mobile crisis outreach teams. These are our counselors, mental health specialists, not classified police officers. And quite frankly, we want to be able to get to people before they get to that point. Okay?
Right.
But when they reach that point, we want to direct those calls, our 911 system, 311, we want to direct those calls from police to our counselors, mental health specialists, and then we want to send out our mobile crisis outreach centers. We have our crisis intervention response teams, where police officers, where they do go out, we want to put clinicians with them, right there in the car with them, that can help to diagnose that situation and not just leaving it up to police officers. There may be times when we can't get that mobile crisis unit out or that crisis intervention response team with that clinician. Let's say that those police officers are traveling by themselves and they run into a situation where they could use the advice of a clinician. And so we have our clinician officer remote evaluation unit with telehealth technology. They can talk to a mental health person or a clinician. They by themselves utilize the technology that's made available, use it, and we're doing that. 40%, for example, of our crimes in the city of Houston are domestic violence, domestic abuse. So we now have our domestic abuse response teams specializing in that particular category. So there are different teams depending on the situations that we find ourselves in, instead of just relying on classified police officers who in many ways may not have the training to assist or the tools to assist. And so it's worth expending, let's say $25 million over the next 3 years, because quite frankly, it can save us a great deal down the road. So this is an investment that will reap dividends, not just for the people who find themselves in crisis, but quite frankly, it benefits law enforcement. We need our police officers. We need our police officers. But it's a disservice to them to ask them to respond to all of these issues. That's unfair to them. And that's putting them in situations where they should not be. So we're trying to really kind of drill down and de-aggregate what we're finding in the community. And I think if we do it and we do it right, I think it will reap dividends for everybody.
That's wonderful. And by pairing those officers with other experts, with other liaisons, you greatly de-escalate situations, right? As you mentioned, that so many of the 911 calls that come through are for issues like truancy, domestic violence, and other mental health issues. So it's an important intervention and an important innovation. I'm going to turn this question to both of you. So many people think or say or claim that addressing criminal justice reform is too big of an issue. It's too big for the mayor's office. It's too big for the business community. It's too hard to garner the resources necessary to commit to building more safe and equitable communities. What advice would you give other leaders in your space about doing this work? Donna, I'm going to start with you. What advice would you give to other business leaders who want to know how to better express their commitment to communities and who need to know that this is doable work?
Yeah, I think you're right that it is too big for any one sector of society to think they can solve it alone. It is really we need everyone in their respective roles and responsibilities to lean in. What I would say to other companies are, there's often a lot of trepidation in getting into sort of non-traditional societal issues. There's a fear of, look, this is not my swim lane. I don't have the expertise. I'm not sure how to evaluate the various issues and arguments on both sides. And obviously, there's a lot of passion oftentimes. What I would say is rely on your partners. Most large corporations have partners with, or if they don't, they should, with the civil and human rights community, our community-based organizations. And, they are the experts. They are on the front lines. Rely on them for guidance about understanding the issues, understanding what's going on on the ground, and where your voice can be most impactful. We spend a lot of time with our stakeholders and partners in community-based organizations, civil and human rights communities, talking about technology. That's our area of expertise. We share with them how technology and technology policy intersects with the work they're doing and impacts their constituency. Likewise, a true partnership is we then sit and learn from them on issues that they're experts on. And that is, certainly.
And you trust their insights. Trust their insights.
And frankly, run things by them and say, what do you think about this? Give us the sort of the behind the scenes dynamics on an issue, or how does this particular policy play out in real life? It may sound good on paper, but is this something that we ought to support or not? So I really think that this, like many other intractable problems, requires collaboration, dialogue, humility and listening, and courage. But this is not an area where I think businesses have realized that this is not an area where you can sit on the sidelines. And it's not an area where you're speaking out because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. Businesses to function and thrive need to have stable communities. They need to have fair and equitable communities, because those are communities in which economic empowerment takes place, in which you have, an educated, economically empowered citizenry who can buy your products and services. So there's very much a business imperative to ensuring that, a number of these societal issues, including a functioning criminal legal system that enjoys the trust and cooperation and respect of communities that you hope will be in a position to buy your products and services. So it's the right thing to do, and it's the business savvy thing to do to weigh in in support of good policy. And the other thing I'd say from if you want to dip your toe into this from the business community side, is look at what is closer to home, which is employment. Speaking to that economic empowerment piece. We didn't get into second chance hiring, but that is something that the Business Roundtable has also created, a second chance business coalition. It has over 24 companies that are members, in which HR professionals are sharing best practices about how to provide source second chance talent, and how to provide the 360 support systems that are necessary to develop that talent and promote that talent. And we all know we're in a really tight labor market right now. So we as businesses cannot afford to leave any segment of the talent pool untapped.
That's right. Well, I'm so glad that you raised it. I'm so glad that you raised it, because it is a clear area where the business community can be involved. They can directly affect their hiring practices, right? And when we have entire communities, you said that in order to that there's a business imperative for having stable communities, but you cannot have stable communities where unemployment is rampant. So thank you for that work, and thank you for mentioning it. And Mayor Turner, what advice would you give to other mayors who have shied away from this issue?
Well, Alaina, let me just say, Donna, I could not have, everything that Donna said would apply to mayors as well. And she said it very well. But there comes a point in time when all of us have to step outside of our comfort zone. I think sometimes people just like to stay in their own little box, in their own little zone, as if the world will not impact them. But that's not the case, and that model just doesn't work. It's all hands on deck, and we have to leverage what we bring with others who bring things as well. The analogy that I use all the time, and I say to people, is it big? Yes, it is big. Yeah. But this country was also built on big visions. Okay. And at the same time, no one person, in a sense, can build a house without relying on others. Okay. So you'll have somebody bring in the lumber or the bricks, and you'll have somebody with the HVAC system, and somebody's, going to have to get the permitting, and you got the architects and engineers. But it takes all of those people working together to build the house. And I say to the people at the city all the time, City of Houston, we got 22,000 employees, 23 different departments. In order to take care of the city's business, all 23 departments, all 22,000 employees, we have to work together. The same thing we're dealing with criminal justice, this whole ecosystem. It requires us all together. And I love what Donna said about humility. Many times, even the mayor, sometimes you just have to recognize what you don't know and yield to people who do know. And it's okay. It's okay. Okay. So in order to get us to where we need to go, humility will is always good. And then recognizing that you don't know it all and you don't have it all. But collectively, we can build this house that can provide everybody in it with what they need.
Well, I think you sort of touched on this, Ben. I always say that our mayors, they don't just talk the talk, Mayor Turner, they walk the walk. So how can community members walk alongside you? How can activists and the community, how can we be in partnership to create safer communities?
Well, from a mayor's point of view, we have to also be inviting. We have to invite people to the table. And here at the City of Houston, for example, I've had rappers around my table who had never been at City Hall before. The Bumbies, the Trader Truths, the Slim Thugs.
Look at you.
They have my cell phone, I have their cell phone. When the 60,000 people marched right immediately after the death of George Floyd, they called me and said, Mayor, we would like for the city to join with us, and we want you to march with us. And I march with them, okay? Because it's not us versus them. The other thing is, so we have to welcome people to the table. We have to let them know that, look, we need you. And that's important. So a lot depends on where you start. Okay. So it's all of us in this together, just like on the task force. Many of them were on the task force that came up. If you want people to buy into the product, then you have to have them helping to participate in the development of the product. Otherwise, you can come up with something, but if they're not included, you're going to have a hard time getting the necessary buy-in. So we're all in it together.
Well, thank you both for your leadership. And thank you both for listening and for respecting the insights of community and being active partners to community on these issues of criminal justice reform. Where can listeners learn more about your work on criminal justice reform?
For me, of course, for the City of Houston, everything that we have put forth is online for the City of Houston. They can always feel free to reach out to me here at the city. But everything that we have done is certainly online. Just turn to the City of Houston website and it's readily available. All of the dashboards readily available.
And for Verizon, we have a Verizon policy handle we have a Twitter handle, and we also have a blog, and we will post a lot of our events. So, and now in the virtual age, it's easy for folks to attend. So we post our events there, and we have one coming up in October, as I mentioned, on Second Chance Hiring. So that's one way. And then I would invite everyone to go to BRT's website. They have a whole site on the Racial Equity Committee's work. And a piece of that is devoted to the criminal justice reform work and the police reform aspect of that work. So lots of good information there.
To continue the conversation, please connect with us on social media at Our Mayors or by using the hashtag Our Mayors Podcast. Our Mayors Podcast is brought to you by the African American Mayors Association. presented and produced in collaboration with Bryant Street Media. Our executive producers from the African American Mayors Association are Nandi Henderson and Rania Kamis. From Bryant Street Media, our executive producer and editor is Janelle Morgan. Thanks for listening to Our Mayor's podcast. Tune in on the last Wednesday of each month for more conversations.